It all began with a phone call, one that seemed like any other. A voice on the other end, confident, calm, in control. He said he was an officer, but he wasn't. That call would trigger a series of events that would lead to one of the most bizarre crime stories the UK had ever seen. Michael Edward Hammond, a name now etched into the criminal history of Britain. But who was he really? A career criminal? A master manipulator? Or simply a man who knew how to play the system better than anyone else? Over the course of 3 decades, Hammond impersonated police officers, doctors, and intelligence agents. He fooled celebrities, breached royal security, and made over 100 bogus emergency calls that led to terror-level police responses. His crimes weren't just lies, they were performances. He was an actor without a stage, a villain without a script. And yet, he left a trail of chaos across an entire nation. In this video, we'll unravel the mind of Michael Edward Hammond, a man so cunning, even the police couldn't keep up with him. But first, let's rewind, back to where it all started. Michael Edward Hammond's story doesn't begin with flashing lights or high-speed chases. It starts in the quiet neighborhoods of South London, where a young boy learned early how to bend reality to suit his needs. From a very young age, Hammond had natural charm. Teachers described him as bright, inquisitive, and often a little too clever for his own good. He had a way of convincing people to trust him. He could mimic voices, play roles, and twist stories in ways that always made him the center of attention. Some kids play pretend. Hammond turned it into an art form. As a teenager, he reportedly told classmates that his father was in MI5. At one point, he even claimed to be royalty. Of course, none of it was true. But here's the thing. People believed him, and he learned that lies, when delivered confidently, could open doors that truth never would. By the time he was 16, Hammond was already forging IDs and using fake names. But these early scams were small. What lay ahead was far more dangerous. Because Hammond didn't just want to scam money. He wanted power, respect, control. And to get those, he'd impersonate the very institutions built to protect us. It all started small. Michael Edward Hammond's first brushes with deception weren't grand scams or international incidents. They were subtle, calculated impersonations, crafted not for money at first, but for power and admiration. As a teenager, Hammond began pretending to be a police cadet. He'd borrow uniforms, talk the talk, and flash fake IDs with unsettling confidence. Neighbors saw him directing traffic or asking routine questions under the guise of training exercises. Most people didn't question him. Why would they? He looked the part, and he spoke with unwavering authority. But these small performances were just rehearsals. Soon, he escalated. He walked into police stations claiming to be with Scotland Yard. He'd show up at accident scenes, interfere with emergency services, and demand access to restricted areas. Incredibly, many believed him. His early impersonations revealed a core truth about Hammond. He wasn't just trying to fool people. He wanted to be them, to wear the badge, carry the title, and command respect without earning it. This wasn't just fraud. It was identity theft on a psychological level. By the time law enforcement started to suspect something, Hammond had already blended truth with lies so effectively that no one knew what to believe. It was no longer a question of whether he was pretending. It was becoming harder to say who the real Michael Hammond even was. By now, Hammond's impersonation game had leveled up. No longer satisfied with just flashing fake badges, he began acting with the full weight and demeanor of actual police officers. Wearing a full uniform, complete with radio gear, he would patrol public places, question civilians, and even perform mock arrests. Some reports even claim he bluffed his way into actual police stations. What's chilling is how authentic he seemed. He used real police codes, mimicked their procedures, and carried himself with such confidence that even other officers didn't question him at first glance. In a twisted way, Hammond didn't just pretend to be the law, he believed he was the law. But it wasn't just about power, it was about access. As a police officer, Hammond gained entry into restricted areas, police databases, and situations that allowed him to collect sensitive information or manipulate people under the guise of authority. Michael Edward Hammond's con artistry didn't stop with the uniform. His next obsession? Fame. And what better way to get close to fame than infiltrate celebrity circles? Using forged identities and smooth-talking charm, Hammond slipped into high society parties across London. He posed as a security consultant, a bodyguard, or even a close friend of a VIP. Often, he dressed the part. Expensive suit, earpiece, confident stance. That was all he needed to blend in. He didn't just attend events, he controlled them. Reports reveal he once acted as the head of security for a major music awards after-party, directing actual security staff, shaking hands with celebrities, and giving off the illusion of importance. People assumed he belonged because he acted like he did. But his most audacious move came in 2020, when Hammond attempted to breach royal security. That's right, he tried to infiltrate Windsor Castle during a public ceremony. Armed with false credentials and a bold attitude, he got alarmingly close to the inner grounds before being stopped. Authorities later admitted it was a close call that could have ended very badly. This wasn't just a prank, it was a massive breach in national security. And yet, even after this stunt, Hammond managed to slip through the cracks again. It was as if the system wasn't equipped to deal with someone who broke every rule with a smile. If pretending to be a police officer was bold and sneaking into royal grounds was dangerous, what Hammond did next was downright terrifying. Michael Edward Hammond began impersonating a doctor. With a stolen identity, fake degrees, and forged certifications, Hammond introduced himself in hospitals and medical events as Dr. Edward Michaels. He claimed to be a trauma surgeon with years of experience. No one questioned him. He had the look, the vocabulary, and the confidence. At a prestigious London hospital, he managed to walk the wards, wearing a stolen white coat, consulting with patients, and even giving medical opinions. While there's no evidence he performed surgeries, his presence was enough to put lives at risk. Staff later admitted they were fooled by how authentic he seemed. The consequences could have been devastating. One nurse recalled how Hammond nearly gave advice on a child's post-surgery treatment plan before being interrupted. He just looked like someone in charge, she said. Eventually, a sharp-eyed administrator flagged discrepancies in his paperwork. An internal investigation revealed the horrifying truth. He was promptly escorted out of the facility, but by then, he'd already spent days in the hospital, speaking to vulnerable patients and making critical decisions. This wasn't just impersonation anymore. This was endangerment. And still, Hammond walked free after just a short sentence. His manipulation of the justice system was almost as flawless as his lies. By now, Michael Edward Hammond had impersonated police, doctors, and VIPs. But nothing would shake the UK more than what he did next. Hammond set his sights on something even more dangerous: the heart of British national security. Between 2015 and 2018, he made over 130 fake emergency calls, all traced back to burner phones. But these weren't just prank calls. These were serious threats, including false reports of terrorist activity in Downing Street, the home of the UK Prime Minister. One particular call triggered an armed police response, sending SWAT teams scrambling to secure government buildings. Roads were closed, helicopters took to the skies, and entire neighborhoods were put on lockdown. All because of a lie. And Hammond? He was watching it unfold, laughing. He had studied the police response times. He knew their protocols. Every call was strategic, designed to waste resources and create panic. At one point, Hammond even posed as an intelligence officer from MI5, calling in a bomb threat just to see how the system would react. Authorities were furious. Intelligence agencies feared that such manipulation could expose real security flaws. One high-ranking officer described Hammond as a one-man disinformation threat. But how did he keep doing it? Simple. He was obsessed with power. Not the kind that rules nations, but the kind that pulls strings from the shadows. And it worked, until he slipped. One of his calls, placed from a phone box in East London, was traced. CCTV captured his image, and this time, police were ready. When they found him, Hammond was carrying multiple fake IDs, burner phones, and a detailed notebook filled with scripts for future scams. But was this the end? By the time the police closed in, Michael Edward Hammond had operated under dozens of aliases, evaded countless arrests, and left behind a trail of chaos. But no one can run forever. It was a quiet evening in East London when the trap was set. Authorities had been tracking him for weeks, using a combination of cell tower data, CCTV, and voice-matching software. His most recent bomb threat call had tipped them off to a location he frequented. The Metropolitan Police set up surveillance around a small internet cafe, where Hammond was known to access encrypted messaging apps. He walked in like he had 100 times before. Calm, confident, untouchable. But this time, he wasn't alone. The second he logged in, the cafe was stormed. Armed officers surrounded him. He didn't resist. He simply smiled and said, "Took you long enough." Inside his satchel, police found a gold mine, multiple forged IDs, handwritten plans for new scams, fake uniforms, and a hard drive filled with audio recordings of emergency calls he'd made. He'd been documenting everything, a trophy collection of deception. Hammond was finally arrested and charged with dozens of offenses, including impersonation of law enforcement, public endangerment, identity fraud, and causing a false bomb scare. His trial would become one of the most widely watched in recent UK history. But what shocked everyone wasn't just what he did, it was why. To truly understand Michael Edward Hammond, you need to step inside his mind, a place where illusion, obsession, and control ruled above all. Psychologists who assessed him after his arrest diagnosed him with narcissistic personality disorder, characterized by a need for admiration, a lack of empathy, and grandiose fantasies of unlimited power and brilliance. But Hammond was more than a narcissist. He was a chameleon, One day, he was a police officer issuing commands on the street. The next, a doctor walking the halls of a hospital. He studied mannerisms, uniforms, vocabulary. He didn't just wear a costume. He became the role. And that's what made him so terrifyingly convincing. His manipulation was methodical. Every con had a structure, a purpose. He played on fear, urgency, and trust, the three pillars of deception. Victims described feeling drawn to him, as if he exuded authority even when doing nothing at all. What Hammond craved most wasn't money. It was power. The power to walk into restricted areas. The power to make police respond to his calls. The power to shape reality with his lies. Experts believe that his early life, marked by instability, rejection, and likely emotional neglect, may have seeded this desperate desire to be seen, respected, and obeyed. To Hammond, each scam wasn't just a crime. It was a performance. And the world? His stage. When news broke that Michael Edward Hammond, a man with over 100 convictions, had once again managed to infiltrate institutions of power, the public reaction was explosive. Newspapers called him the nation's ultimate imposter. Tabloids splashed his photo across their front pages, while TV anchors recounted his bizarre tales with disbelief. Social media lit up with threads and videos analyzing his behavior, impersonations, and the systemic failures that let him slip through again and again. People weren't just shocked, they were angry. How can someone impersonate a police officer and gain access to high security areas without being detected for so long? That was the question on everyone's lips. The police faced heavy criticism. How did they not catch on sooner? Why were his 133 fake emergency calls not flagged? How did he gain access to Downing Street without credentials? And while some were outraged, others were weirdly fascinated. Hammond became a sort of infamous figure. A criminal, yes, but also someone with a strange allure. His intelligence, audacity, and ability to deceive tapped into society's obsession with master manipulators. Documentaries and podcasts quickly followed, trying to unpack his life and motives. A few even questioned whether he had help on the inside. Conspiracies that have never been proven, but linger in internet forums. Yet beneath all the headlines and hashtags, one truth remained. Hammond wasn't just a criminal. He was a reflection of deeper flaws in the systems we trust. After years of eluding consequences with slick lies and forged identities, Michael Edward Hammond finally faced the full weight of the justice system. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, victims, investigators, and curious spectators filled every bench. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but the world watched closely as details of Hammond's deceptions were laid bare. Prosecutors described him as a manipulative and persistent fraudster who posed a serious threat to public safety. They meticulously walked the court through each of his impersonations, from fake paramedic to bogus cop, and even the time he convinced a hospital he was a trauma consultant. But what shook the courtroom the most was the Downing Street terrorism hoax. In that single act, he didn't just waste public resources. He triggered a national emergency response, putting innocent lives at risk and causing widespread panic. The prosecution made it clear this wasn't harmless pretending. It was dangerous, calculated, and criminal. His defense, meanwhile, tried to paint a picture of a troubled man with mental health issues, someone who didn't fully grasp the consequences of his actions. They claimed he sought validation, not harm. But it wasn't enough. The jury didn't take long to deliberate. Michael Edward Hammond was found guilty on multiple charges: impersonation of public officials, misuse of emergency services, fraud, and making false terrorist claims. The judge, stern and unsparing, called him a serial liar whose actions put countless lives at risk. He was sentenced to 7 years in prison, with additional monitoring upon release. The sentence sent a message: no matter how clever, no matter how long you escape the law, eventually justice catches up. But even behind bars, Hammond remained a topic of conversation. Some wondered if he was already plotting his next con. As the dust settled and Hammond sat behind bars, a larger question began to echo in the minds of the public and law enforcement alike. How did one man, with no formal training, fool so many for so long? The answer isn't as simple as calling him a con artist. Michael Edward Hammond was a master of psychological manipulation. He understood human behavior on an instinctual level. He didn't need real credentials. He wore confidence like a uniform, and people rarely questioned a man who seemed to belong. In a world where uniforms and titles demand immediate respect, Hammond exploited the blind spots. He knew how to speak the language of authority, the clipped tone of a police officer, the calm command of a doctor, the technical jargon of intelligence officials. But his success wasn't just about confidence. It was also about exploiting the cracks in large institutions. Bureaucracies often assume internal accountability, where one department expects another to vet someone. Hammond used that to slip through security at events, walk into hospitals, and insert himself into situations most of us could never imagine. Even technology didn't slow him down. He spoofed phone numbers, used fake IDs, created websites, and manipulated online profiles. He was a one-man show, operating with tools easily available to anyone, but used with masterful deception. Psychologists have often labeled people like Hammond as high-functioning sociopaths, lacking remorse, fueled by ego, but capable of mimicking emotion. Was he mentally ill? Perhaps, but even mental illness doesn't fully explain the scope of his manipulation. The truth is, people want to believe. In emergencies, in moments of crisis, or when dealing with someone who seems official, most won't question authority. That trust is what Hammond preyed on. And yet, for all his intelligence and planning, he left behind a trail. Every call, every impersonation, every lie added weight to a file that eventually became impossible to ignore. Michael Edward Hammond is now a household name in the UK. Not because of fame earned, but because of the chaos he left behind. His story is a mirror held up to society, reflecting vulnerabilities we often choose to ignore. What he did was not just fraud, it was an attack on trust, a challenge to the systems we depend on. He infiltrated police forces, hospitals, private security, and even royal grounds, not with weapons, but with lies. And he proved that lies, when delivered with conviction, can be just as dangerous. In the aftermath of his sentencing, government agencies began auditing their verification protocols. Hospitals installed stricter ID systems. Police began retraining officers on impersonation threats. And the public, shocked and angered, began to question how many other Hammonds could be walking among us. Journalists, documentarians, and criminologists have studied Hammond's case extensively. His manipulation tactics are now taught in seminars about fraud prevention and psychological profiling. In a strange twist, he has become a case study, an example of what unchecked deception can accomplish. But there's another legacy too: the victims. From those wrongly accused because of his bogus calls, to the patients he endangered, to the people whose trust he shattered. Many of them still carry the scars. Even from behind bars, Hammond's name echoes through headlines. Some still believe he craves that attention, that even infamy is a form of victory to him. Perhaps they're right, but to the rest of us, his story is a chilling reminder. Never underestimate the power of confidence wrapped in lies. It can walk through locked doors, wear badges it doesn't earn, and destroy lives in its path.